Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. The US-Iran war is now more than 2 months old. And despite talk of a ceasefire, it looks increasingly like the next round may already be underway. Trump has announced a US military operation to guide stranded ships through the Strait of Hormuz, while Iran is warning that any unauthorized US military presence near the strait will be treated as hostile. At the same time, Washington is rejecting key parts of Iran's peace proposal, especially around sanctions, the blockade, and nuclear enrichment. So, is this a pause before a wider war? Is Iran actually weakened, as Trump claims, or has the war strengthened support for resistance inside the country? And how is Tehran preparing for what may come next? Joining me from Tehran is Navid Zarrinnal, an Iranian-American academic and host of the Colony Archive. Navid, welcome back to Dispatches.
Rania, thank you for having me.
Well, there's so much I want to talk to you about. The last time I spoke to you, we had to cut our interview short because the Israelis, it was the Black Wednesday. It was literally at the time that the Israelis dropped 160 bombs in 10 minutes in Beirut and killed like 400 people. So this is almost a month later that I'm talking to you, and hopefully I don't have to be distracted by that. And I can ask you some of the questions I didn't get to ask you last time, in addition to some more relevant questions to recent developments. And I kind of want to start with recent developments in the sense that, we now have this latest escalation with the Strait of Hormuz, with Trump saying that the U.S. is launching an operation to escort or guide ships through the strait with U.S. military escorts. Iran, of course, says that this violates the ceasefire and is threatening to respond. And I guess kind of just wanted to get, your take on this latest escalation. If the U.S. actually goes through with this, how do you see Iran responding?
Yes. So I think the U.S. is pretty frustrated because they don't have as much control when it comes to blocking Iranian ships and vessels compared to Iran, because Iran is controlling the Strait of Hormuz, that is a narrow choke point, whereas the US has to patrol a much wider area with Iranian ships entering the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. And from the reports that I've been reading, it seems that they can just go through the Pakistani and the Indian waters and, in a sense, avoid the U.S. piracy, which Trump himself admitted that, there were like pirates boarding one of the Iranian ships. So the U.S. is frustrated, and also the closure or the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz to hostile ships means that the global economy, in a way, is hurting. So Donald Trump wants to act as fast as he can. And if he does carry with his threats, I mean, he made the same threats weeks ago during the war, that the U.S. Navy will escort the ships, the commercial ships, but I don't think that ever happened. So it's not clear how credible the threat is. But if he does carry on with it, I think the Iranians will respond, and they will retaliate against the U.S. fleets and the U.S. Navy assets in the region.
I mean, it just seems crazy because, it's like the war has been in this pause situation with all of these potential opportunities for it to restart. And officially, of course, there's been talk of a ceasefire and these negotiations. Are they happening? Aren't they happening? But then you have the U.S. blockading Iran's blockade. And then you've got now this like naval standoff, and then these continued threats. So, I mean, I know the bombs aren't falling on Iran anymore or on the Gulf states anymore. They're still falling on Lebanon, of course. But all that's to say, is this really, would you classify this as a ceasefire? Would you put it in the category of more, of like a temporary pause before a potential round two?
Yes, you're very right that Lebanon is in a much more fragile situation. And so since the ceasefire, that was, I can't even remember when it was, but I think it was a couple of weeks ago, there hasn't been any bombings in Iran. So I haven't heard any bombs. It's been, relatively peaceful, even though the Lebanese have been experiencing Israeli aggression during the ceasefire, even though one of Iran's conditions was that Israel should not attack Lebanon for the ceasefire to hold. The ceasefire has been holding in Iran in a sense that there has not been bombings, but then when it comes to US and Israeli actions, you could say that they've been violating the ceasefire and they're not showing good faith. And because they're not showing good faith, it's very difficult for the Iranians to do anything in return. So they have to hold on to the Strait of Hormuz as their leverage. And as you were hinting in your question, when it comes to the resumption of war against Iran, my speculation is that it won't be as extensive as it was during the Ramadan or the 40-day war. And this time it would be more limited. But I think the chances of US and Israel attacking Iran again.
So I want to ask you about some of the claims Trump has made, and I wanted to get your response about what's actually going on because, I don't really take Trump's claims at face value, but he is saying them. One of the claims that he's making is that, he keeps saying that Iran is collapsing and that he's repeatedly said that Iran's navy has been destroyed by the US just over and over and over again. And then one thing he keeps referencing over and over the last couple of weeks is he keeps saying that the Iranian government, the decision makers, are in disagreement with each other and they're all arguing and they can't figure out what they want. So I'm curious from inside Iran where you are, and of course you follow these, what's happening inside Iran regularly, you understand how the Iranian system works. How seriously should we take these claims that Trump is making about, collapse and about the fact that the Iranian decision makers just can't agree with each other? There's different factions fighting.
Yes, no, it's a good question. And at this point, Donald Trump has lied so many times. He has said so many contradictory things. And it's not just about the war on Iran. It's about so many other things that in a way he loses his credibility and it's difficult to take him seriously. So I would say, he's talking about the fracture within the Iranian political leadership in order to make Iran appear weak and make the American and the Israeli side appear to be stronger and appear to have the advantage. But I don't think that's the case. I think when it comes to this particular war and the approach to the war and peace, the Iranian leadership is relatively united and they're following the recommendations of the Iranian leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, and also the ground knowledge of the IRGC and the armed forces. And then people like Araghchi, the beloved Iranian foreign minister, go and execute it. But what is true is that there are different political camps in Iran. And then the so-called moderates are a little bit more willing, or more than a little bit, they're more willing, as we saw with the Javad Zarif article, I think it was in Foreign Affairs, that he was saying that, let's just open the straits because, they think there will be sanctions relief or because they want to integrate it into the new liberal global markets. So the more liberal leaning so-called moderate camp, they're more willing to give concessions, whereas the so-called hardline camp is less willing to give concessions because they are more aware and more sober about colonial history and also about Iran's recent experience, because after the nuclear deal in 2015, Donald Trump withdrew in 2018, and then after that, he bombed the negotiations table twice. And one last thing I should say is that the entire binary that we hear in the Western media about the moderates and the hardliner, it is coming from a Western-centric perspective, because the idea is that if you're willing to give concessions or surrender or become more liberal, then you're a nice moderate person. But if you're not willing to do that, if you want to fight for your sovereignty, then you're a hardliner. So I don't like that binary, but I use that because it's probably familiar to your audience. But another way we can conceptualize it is the difference between the more resistance approach and the more liberal approach. And right now, the resistance camp, I would say, has the upper hand in the country.
So I want to ask you, as I really appreciate you breaking it down like that. That's a really important way to view it. I want to ask you, though, can you explain, because Western officials and media keep suggesting, like I mentioned before, this chaos and division inside of Iran. I guess I want to ask, who is in charge of Iran? Who are the decision makers right now, particularly with regard to this war?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, it's difficult for me to say because I'm not privy to the the secretive meetings and information that are taking place. So I can only infer from what I'm reading and what I'm hearing and what I'm experiencing here. But it seems to extend the response to my last question. It seems that the IRGC, with fighting experience on the ground, and also Mojtaba Khamenei, the leader who came after his father, he was appointed by the Assembly of Experts, that is an elected body that chooses the supreme leader for the country. I think they're the ones who are, in a way, making the decisions. But then when they're implemented in the diplomatic and in the international arena, there's a lot of discretion on the part of the Pezeshkian government. I think there might be, in some areas, some differences. But at the same time, I think they try to be faithful as much as they can to the leaders' recommendations and decisions. And lastly, I would say another element, I talked about the political elite here, but I would say another very important element in making the decisions are the people who are on the streets. So I go out to the major intersections every other night, and there are a couple thousand people in each major intersection chanting and asking the Iranian state to fight and get a good deal or peace agreement and allow Iran to come out stronger from this war compared to the 12-day war. And those people who are on the streets are also putting a lot of pressure on the elected officials and on the leader to make the right decisions that would benefit Iran when it comes to Iran's sovereignty and future long-term economic prosperity. So the people on the streets are also a major element in making the decisions right now.
I want to ask you just to clarify, because, this is going to sound like such a simple, dumb question, but in the Western English lexicon, especially in the media, the IRGC is kind of used or thrown around the way that like Hamas is or Hezbollah is, right? It's like this person's fronting for the IRGC. The IRGC is just this big evil, and they've taken over the country now. Can you just like give a brief explanation of like, what is the IRGC? Just very straightforward. Yeah.
No, it's actually a really good question, because a lot of people don't know, and I'll give you the brief explanation. So the history of the IRGC goes back to the early revolution years in 1979, and Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the Iranian revolution, had understood that you need to have an independent fighting force, an independent army that is not connected to the Western capitals, because during the Shah's period, or with many other colonized countries, such as Jordan, where you had a British officer, Claude Pasha, coming to Jordan and actually training the Jordanian army. In a similar way with the Shah's army, a lot of the generals and the fighting forces would go to places like the US and train there, or they would have connections to the US. Even the Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, who currently claims to be the leader of the opposition, and you've probably seen him, on TV. He lives in DMV, close to where you've been, Rania. And recently he got attacked by ketchup, because there's a joke about him that he looks like the ketchup jar. But anyways, that's kind of an inside Iranian joke. But he does kind of look like that ketchup jar that we have. I can send you a picture later. But yeah, he got attacked by ketchup sauce, I think in Germany. Just somebody throw it at him. But anyway, so he went to the US to train as a pilot when he was in his teens, and he received pilot training in Texas. So you had the connections, and that meant that anytime you had a sovereign leader who would try to change things for the better and for the benefit of the people who lived in that country, and to nationalize the resources or anything that would serve the interests of sovereignty, then the army that was connected to the West would orchestrate a coup d'etat against that person. So we had it, in Chile with Allende, you had it in Iran with Mossadegh, and Khomeini had understood that. And so when he came to power in 1979, he established the IRGC as an independent fighting force that would not, in a way, orchestrate coup d'etats against sovereign interests. And so the IRGC comes from there. There were initially these kind of neighborhood committees, and then eventually they expanded, they became armed. They also made gateways into the Navy and also the economy. So some of them are wealthy, and they hold the economic cards as well, some of the IRGC members. But then there are also a lot of poor members, dispossessed members that also just serve as the fighting forces in the IRGC. So that's where the IRGC comes from. And then over the years, they have become stronger, and now they are the main armed forces and the main fighting force of Iran against the US and Israeli aggression.
Well, no wonder the Americans hate them so much and basically classify them as like a terrorist, state-sponsored terrorist group. I want to ask you to elaborate on something that you actually touched on a few questions ago, and that's the issue of the quote unquote reformers, the moderates, as they're classified by the West, because they do believe in the idea of like capitulating and compromising in a way that the people who are called hardliners don't. I would imagine after everything that's happened, and we've kind of talked about this on the show before, but after everything that's happened over the last 10 years, they might have lost some influence given the fact that capitulation and compromise with the US has really blown up in everybody's face, right? Like Iran has tried that route. And like you mentioned, the JCPOA ended up getting torn up. And every time Iran has compromised or demonstrated any sort of restraint, the Americans and the Israelis have taken that to mean that Iran is weak rather than reasonable and moderate as you would think it would be perceived. But all of that is to say, I just want to ask you, what has happened to Iran's reformist camp since this latest war? Has the war shifted the political balance internally in the country, or is there still the same kind of tug of war that took place before?
Yes, so I would say the reformist camp, in a way, became embarrassed, at least some people in the reformist camp, because a lot of them were saying, including Zarif and Sadegh Ziba-Kalam, who is a liberal professor of sociology at the University of Tehran, they were saying that if the US attacks Iran, this is what Ziba-Kalam said, all that would remain would be an electricity pole. So meaning that, Iran has no real deterrence, they have no power to resist the Americans, so they should capitulate and surrender because, the day after the attack is that nothing would remain from the country. But then since that did not turn out to be true and Iran was able to stand its ground and in fact, force a ceasefire on the Americans, people like Ziba Kalam and a lot of the reformists are a little bit embarrassed, and they've realized that their kind of predictions and analysis were not correct. So right now, I would say, yes, the reformists, especially because a lot of them were also saying that, let's just surrender, let's become a normal country and everything will be okay. And now that they're seeing that Iran is actually able to fight and get concessions from the countries that attacked it, and I mean that might happen in the future, they might get some concessions. I would say they already did, because the oil tankers that were already afloat in the waters, they received sanctions relief because Iran showed so much strength during the war, and also it really put a reverse embargo on the global markets that the US had to relax some of the sanctions so the Iranian oil could flow. So in that sense, they got some concessions, and I think in the future too, as the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed to hostile ships, they will probably get more concessions. So the reformists are kind of realizing that their analysis of the world was not correct. And regarding their popularity, their political popularity, we have to wait and see what happens in the next presidential and parliamentary elections.
Wait, what? Iran has elections? I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Iran has elections. They have presidential and municipal elections, just like a lot of other countries in the world.
They do, but what's difficult about it is that you have to write in the name of every candidate, so that gets really annoying. So even with the assembly of the experts that appoints the leader, so they're a body that's elected by the people, and then they appoint the leader. In the case of the leader dying or getting assassinated, as happened with Sayyid Ali Khamenei, you vote for them too, and then you have to write the name of every one of them, and it's kind of a nightmare. So I think the American elections are easier because it's just kind of like Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and then you have like a third write-in option. You just tick it. The ticking is easier. So
are you calling for intervention to fix this nightmare that you just discussed?
Yeah, I am. It is.
I want to ask you, Navid, about the fact that, and I know you're not privy to like military information, but you obviously consume Iranian media and you hear what the Iranian officials are saying. Militarily and politically, is Iran prepared if the war resumes?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say politically, when it comes to the general political environment of the country, they are, even though just speaking from personal experience, so as the war was kind of dragging on for 39, 40 days, I was kind of going in a mental state where I was just prepared every day. So, I had like a little bag prepared with the essentials in case there's a bombing near my home that I could, go to a safer location. And then mentally, spiritually, I was just very prepared. I was praying a lot. I was doing all that. So I was in a kind of a state that, there's a war on the country and I'm here to defend it and I'm here to be part of it. But now that there's a ceasefire, kind of, you kind of lose that energy. But I think if there's an attack again, whatever energy that was lost would be regained. And I can't really speak for the armed forces. I mean, I think they're kind of rebuilding, reorganizing with the ceasefire as the Americans and the Israelis are. But I think they're also prepared. But more importantly, the people on the streets that are mentioned that are coming out every night, they have been consistently coming out. So that hasn't really weakened. So I was in Revolutionary Square in Tehran, which is this iconic square in the heart of the city. And there were thousands and thousands of people there. I put a reel of it on my Instagram where they're singing a nostalgic 1979. And the crowd was just insane. So that momentum has sustained itself. And if the war resumes, I think it will be even stronger than what we witnessed in March.
No, I want to ask you a bit more about public opinion, but before we get to that, I just kind of have a couple more questions about Iran's military capacity. And again, I know this is really just based on your understanding of like, I guess I would want to know your understanding of how things have played out afterwards. Yes, of course, everybody is rebuilding, regrouping, recalibrating. That's what happens during a pause or during a ceasefire. We keep hearing Trump saying that Iran's Navy and air defenses have been totally destroyed. And that they're just done. They can't do anything else, but Iran could have kept going. So I guess my question would be, if a war were to resume, like Iran still has the capacity to hit the Gulf states. It still has the capacity to do what it was doing to the Israelis, hitting them with ballistic missiles. And then we haven't even talked about what would happen in the Strait of Hormuz because like war didn't really break out there. It was just a matter of, I think there was like a few ships that received like Iranian either hits or warning hits and then turned back. But once you did that once or twice, no ship is going to go through there again. So that's what we mean when we say it's effectively closed. But now if the US is actually serious about having the US Navy escort ships, that's another thing entirely. Then you're talking about the Americans. God, it would be so stupid because you'd just be opening yourself up to Iranian missiles right where they can hit you. But I guess, what would your guess be on how Iran would respond if hostilities were to reignite? And before your answer, I do get the sense that one thing I see when it comes to Iran is they always seem to respond to what is being done to them with a proportionate response, is how I would put it. So it's like, if the US and Israel, I would assume if the US and Israel go back to hitting certain kinds of Iranian infrastructure, then we would see the Gulf states get hit again in a similar manner. It's like a tit for tat. And then we'd have to wait and see how the Strait of Hormuz would play out. But yeah, how would you see that playing out?
Yeah, you're very much right that Iranian restraint has been pretty incredible. So despite, all the propaganda and the Iranophobic media narratives that we have, I mean, I remember even as early as 2010-ish, around the Arab Spring, there was this talk that Iran is going to attack Israel or the US with nuclear weapons. So in a way, they would also prop up Iranian strength, because in 2010, Iran didn't even have as sophisticated of a missile program, but they were saying that Iran is somehow going to put or launch nuclear weapons against Israel and US. So despite all that propaganda, Iran has shown a lot of strength, and they've only responded to attacks. And even when the US would attack something in Iran or Israel would attack something in Iran, as you said, Iran would respond proportionally to that attack. And I remember I went to the universities that were targeted here. So the Iran University of Science and Technology, for example, one of the main research STEM centers was bombed by the US, and it also damaged the Islamic Studies Department and the physics building. But after that, Iran produced a list of all these American universities in the Gulf Persian Gulf region that it could target, but it didn't actually target any of them. So I think it showed restraint there, and it just targeted things that were not educational in nature. So you definitely see that. But regarding the resumption of the hostilities, I would say yes. So Iran would kind of continue with a strategy of targeting American assets in the region, and also targeting apartheid Israel, places like Tel Aviv and Haifa, where there is a lot of important and strategic interest. So it would do that. But one thing that they might do, and in this case, it would be that restraint would be a little bit broken down, is that if the American blockade of Iranian ships continue, then Iran might actually try to target the U.S. Navy and drive them back and kind of end that blockade. So there's also that possibility that might happen before the war resumes.
Yeah, God, I just think, some people were suggesting maybe Trump made this announcement about escorting ships to calm the markets. It just seems so dumb, but a lot of what the U.S. has done throughout these last 2 months has been very dumb and sort of like short-sighted. So I want to ask you a bit more about public opinion inside Iran. You've said people inside Iran. I've seen in your coverage. People should go check out your Instagram page. Your videos are fantastic. And in one of your videos, you sort of explained how people inside Iran are more supportive of resistance now after this attack than they were before. Can you explain what you mean by that? What you're seeing, and would this suggest that the war indeed backfired politically, at least on Washington?
So before the war, in multiple contexts, social contexts, whether it was in taxis or with family, with friends on the street, whatever social context you would find yourself in, there was a lot of cynicism. So people would complain and say that 47 years of resistance and economic sovereignty led us to inflation, and the inflation is pretty terrible here. And also they had other complaints saying that, we try to produce everything ourselves, but then our car industry is not very good. And they're right about it. Iranian car manufacturing, is self-reliant. So if, there are all these sanctions that don't let us buy foreign products, then we have things like cars. We have, hygiene industry. Our food is relatively self-sufficient. So let's say that the quality of the car manufacturing is not even like the U.S. And they were saying that we should have just been like Dubai. And Dubai, they didn't resist. They normalized with Israel, and they opened their country to Western investments. And the Westerners coming, and they seem to be prospering. But then what happened is that after the war, they saw that Dubai suffered a lot. So a lot of the Western capital that was there left. A lot of the people that were there were rushing. They were paying as much as, I was seeing some reports that they were paying as much as, say, $40,000 or something around that to just, get a flight and leave the country. So that happened. And after a short period of insecurity, the whole UAE suffered a lot. Same with Kuwait. Kuwait has not been able to export any of its oil in the month of April. They have exported zero oil in the month of April. But the Iranians realized that despite this war, they've been kind of, the country has been functioning relatively normally, at least relative to the UAE and Kuwait. And they realized that the resistance actually gives you a lot. So it gives you a lot of dignity, but it also gives you self-sufficiency in difficult times. So I would say there's much more optimism now. And there was even a poll conducted by the Iranian television here, and 71.7% of the respondents said that they're optimistic about Iran's future after the war. And even if that poll had a flawed methodology, because people say that, it's Iranian media, so it's going to be biased, just based on my anecdotal experiences here and talking to people and friends, and colleagues, I see that attitudes are definitely changing, and Iranians are gaining a lot more confidence about the resistance approach. But what I have to qualify here is that if the war stops and the economic situation keeps getting worse and inflation keeps rising, and say the money that Iran is getting from the Strait of Hormuz does not go back to the economy, and it goes, somehow, it is spent on rentier corruption and all that, then I could see that cynicism coming back. But for now, I would say the public opinion is on the optimistic side.
Okay, that's super interesting. And by the way, just I don't know how the situation might change once this airs in a few hours later today. I just want you to know this is super interesting. So the Iranian state affiliated agency, Fars News, reported that 2 Iranian missiles hit a U.S. Navy vessel near Iran that was heading towards the Strait of Hormuz. And then not too long after that, U.S. CENTCOM denied that this happened and said no U.S. Navy ships have been struck. So we'll see what's happening there, but super interesting developments. Super interesting developments.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is, there are always these contradictory reports. Even when it came to the supposed rescue of the pilots, the Iranians claimed that the U.S. Conducted an operation where they were trying to steal Iran's uranium, and it failed miserably. So they made up a whole story about it. And then CENTCOM denied that it was an operation by the Delta Force to get Iran's uranium out. And what's crazy to me is that how faithful the Western media is to the U.S. officials. So if the Iranian officials say something, they will not even report on it. They will not even say Iranian officials say so and so. They say that 2 of the American vessels were targeted today. They will not even report on it. You have to go to the non-Western media to actually get the reports about it. And yes, I saw those reports a couple hours ago too, and we have to wait and see whether they're true.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. So I want to ask you, Navid, about economic pressure, because obviously, like, the U.S. is, is trying to use maximum pressure against the Iranian economy to try to pressure Iran to blink first. And Iran has had to deal with economic warfare from the Americans for decades. So it's not new to dealing with that. But that said, this is still a very difficult time, I'm sure. So I guess I'm wondering, how are ordinary Iranians dealing with this, I guess, affordability crisis, we could call it, this economic warfare from the U.S., on top of the sanctions Iran has already been dealing with. I'm part of the reason the U.S. does this, and they say this openly, is because they want that economic pain to translate into anger at the Iranian government. But is that happening? Is it translating into anger at the Iranian government? Is it translating to anger at the U.S.? Is it both? And then I guess I'm going to throw in another question here. How is the Iranian government trying to mitigate the worst impact of this increasingly maximum level of economic warfare that the U.S. is engaging in against Iran?
Yes. So related to one of my other responses earlier, I would say the anger and the cynicism are lower at the Iranian government because of the war. And what's actually incredible is that during the war, the Iranian rial didn't actually fall any further. So it was pretty stable. It only fell a little bit in the past few days, probably because of the naval blockade and whatever other economic warfare the U.S. is conducting in Iran that causes the currency to lose its value. But during the entire war period for 40 years, the Iranian rial was stable, and that was pretty incredible. And it might have had to do with the fact that Iran performed so well in the war, although I don't know the economics of it. But economically, things have been difficult in some ways because a lot of projects are on hold. Because the thing is, people are just, they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. They're in this kind of limbo state where there could be a permanent peace, but there could also be war again. So they put a lot of things on hold, and that hurts, people who have taken on projects, or it's difficult to take on new projects, or a lot of interviews for jobs are canceled. But then if you're, say, in the media sphere, then you have more work to do because of the war. So it kind of depends on your industry. But then for many people, the projects have been put on hold. And also another thing that hurts Iran economically is that U.S. and Israel bombed Iran's foulad industry. And I think foulad is steel industry. That's one of the mother industries here that produces material for so many other industries. And now they have to rebuild the steel factories. And that will take some time and will have some impact on the economy. But what is incredible is the Iranian ability to rebuild things quickly. So after some of the bridges and the railroads were damaged, they rebuild that within days. And I mean, they don't rebuild it in the most, in the prettiest way, but they rebuild it to a point that it gets functional. So they're rebuilding, and I think if they're able to generate revenue from the Strait of Hormuz, that will feed back into the economy. if they're able to keep the corruption at bay, and then that will, in a way, reignite and breathe new life into the economy.
Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you, Navid, there's this kind of growing argument, at least in the Western countries, about the fact that Iran is winning the information war, especially in English language social media. And, we've seen these sort of viral, the Lego videos, the viral AI generated Lego videos, the memes, this content that, very smartly and entertainingly and very on point, mocks Trump, highlights these US contradictions. And they've really been resonating with global audiences, these videos. And some analysts even say that this content is reaching millions and shaping opinion, like far beyond even just like North America. Do people inside Iran talk about this at all? Is there an awareness that Iran is effectively winning this narrative battle online, at least? And even if you look at US public opinion, they are too, by the way. Or is that mostly something happening externally in English-speaking spaces?
No, it's a good question. I think it depends on the person, because if they're kind of media savvy and if they're more cosmopolitan leaning, or they know the different languages, then they're more aware of Iran's upper hand in the PR war right now. But otherwise, I mean, even if not, I mean, they probably have heard some things about it. And I think that there are two ways that Iran succeeded here. One is that they linked the aggression to the Epstein class, the hated Epstein class that's hated in both the US and globally. And I would say that even the MAGA people and the right-wingers in the US, because they're not able to have a proper critique of capitalism, they kind of blame their plight, their economic plight on the Epstein class without really bringing capitalism into it. So the idea is that capitalism is good, but the Epstein class ruined it for us in a sense. And that's fine because the Epstein class is in a way linked to American and global capitalism. So you can kind of blame both, but they just blame the Epstein class. But because of that hatred for the Epstein class in the US and around the world, Iran has been able to kind of capitalize on that. And also the Lego animations that are coming out, I mean, they were so successful that YouTube banned the explosive media channels. And now, in a way, it's decentralized. And they have, say a page on Instagram that might also get taken down. But there are all these different pages, independent pages that release and publish their Lego movies that are coming out every day. And those are also very effective. They're not really geared towards an Iranian audience because they're in English and they have, a lot of like American pop culture references and a lot of hip hop in it. So I think they probably have also like, in a way, an organic force outside Iran or within Iran that's very cognizant about these global trends, and they're able to draw on it in order to connect with global audiences. And those have been very successful. I think that the Pete Hegseth, the Minister of War, the Secretary of War, as they call in the US, the diss track against him was brilliant. I would put it next to Ice Cube's No Vaseline or Tupac's Hit 'Em Up. It was just so brilliant. I think it was AI, but at the same time, the music,
oh my God,
the
lyrics, amazing. Yeah.
It was incredible. Yeah. I was so pleased with that one. But you're right. So in that area, I would say they succeeded. And at this point, the Trump administration and the Epstein class are just so repulsive that they're not able to really generate a good PR war. And I think a lot of the propaganda points like, women's rights, democracy, human rights, weapons of mass destruction, those have been so worn and exhausted that even the Americans are not going to buy it anymore. So I think Trump just has to rely on bad PR, which is this naked colonial aggression that we want their oil. So on the PR front too, I think for the first time, Iran is actually winning.
I mean, yeah, you could actually say this is the first time that I can think of where in an American aggression against a country, that country has actually done this magnificent of a job at PR, because it's usually not the case at all. And it's not just, it's not just the Lego movies, it's also Iranian officials. Like, people have fallen in love with Abbas Araghchi, around the world. It's actually quite amazing. And before they killed Ali Larijani, he was becoming a kind of like superstar, far beyond Iran. So it's been quite interesting to see that, because historically speaking, it's not the case that you have the officials of, official enemy country going on Sunday morning news shows and, just being on fire. against
Yeah.
these like dumb anchors, you know?
Yeah.
I want to ask you about not necessarily the specifics, just this 14-point proposal where Iran has sent the US this 14-point proposal to end the war, which includes all the same conditions that Iran has been, trying to negotiate with the US since this war started, or even before it started, but specifically since this war started. And I actually wanted to just touch on a couple of the points in that proposal. One of the issues is that, Washington wants to prioritize nuclear concessions first, but the nuclear enrichment issue has become a red line for the Iranians. And so why won't Tehran simply give up, the nuclear enrichment issue to end the war?
Yeah. I think it goes back to the point I was making in one of the other episodes that Iran's demands are not maximalist. They're actually pretty reasonable. And the idea is that we are a member of the NPT and we have the sovereign rights to our nuclear energy program. And then we're not just going to surrender it. We're not going to give it away because it would be unjust and oppressive, and it would violate basic international norms and the value of sovereignty. So we're not just going to give it away. And what we're asking for is not maximalist, to have a nuclear energy program like many other countries that have it. It would not be maximalist. It would be a reasonable demand. And that's why they're insisting on it. But more importantly, it's also the slippery slope. Because if the Iranians give one thing away, then the Americans are just going to have more expectations. So I think they're willing to give reasonable things away. So they might compromise on US bases and US fighting forces staying in the region, because that's something that's more an affirmative thing for the US to actually commit to, that they have to do something in order to do it. But when it comes to the nuclear energy program or the uranium, the US doesn't really have to do anything. They just have to leave Iran alone and tell them that, like other countries, like say France, you have this right to a nuclear program. So in that sense, if Iran gives that thing away, then the slippery slope comes, and they're going to ask for the missiles, they're going to ask for everything else, and they're going to, in a way, neuter Iran. That was the word that Trump himself used, and then attack Iran, and then turn Iran into a failed state. So the Iranians understand this. They've learned from the experience of Libya and other countries, and they're standing firm by their reasonable demands in order to have a permanent peace agreement.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see like how that sort of angle of this continues to develop. And then the other issue I wanted to ask you about with regard to Iran's demands is Iran keeps insisting, and I appreciate this insistence very much, that Lebanon be a part of any broader settlement. And so I wanted to ask you if you could explain why it is that Lebanon is so central to Tehran's position here. And I know there's like an ideological aspect of this, but there's also a real material reason for this.
Yes. So, I mean, the ideological one is the joint fight against Zionism that comes from the idealism of the Iranian Revolution, which Hezbollah was, just beginning to form back then around the same time as the Iranian Revolution. And so both Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolution have this idealist commitment to anti-Zionism and the liberation of Palestine. But over time, it gained a realist dimension. So now the idea is that in order for the region to thrive economically and politically, you have to have these alliances, and you have to fight off and reduce the power of apartheid Israel and American imperialism in the region. And also, I mean, more importantly, I mean, beyond these kind of idealist and realist perspectives here, it is also the value of alliance and friendship. I mean, I think it goes against the Kissinger maxim. I think Kissinger said that it is dangerous, I'm paraphrasing, but that it's dangerous to be a US enemy, but it's deadly to be an American friend, meaning that the American friends could also be betrayed and the US could turn against them, such as, the Kurds in Syria, that the US was friends with them, but then when the interests diverged, they, in a way abandoned them. But the Iranian mentality is not the same. And I think part of it is a cultural thing, that the idea is that, we say in Persian, "Nun o namak taraf khordam." Nun o namak khordanish, it means that I ate his bread and salt. And if you eat someone's bread and salt, and in a way you have this kind of personal relationship, you have this deep friendship, you will not betray them and you will stand with them. And in the same way, I would say the Iranian friendship and alliance with Hezbollah is similar. It goes back to this culture of marifats, in a way, doing things for your friend, caring for your friends. And the Iranians are doing that right now with Lebanon.
Well, as somebody speaking to you from Lebanon, I certainly certainly hope that does come to fruition. And then I wanted to ask you your thoughts about the role of the Gulf states now, because, you know, we saw that they continue to present themselves as victims of all of this, as if they weren't hosting U.S. military bases. Like, I was watching an Al Jazeera segment yesterday, and there was this woman on who was like very pro Gulf state, and there was this Iranian analyst on, and she was responding to something he said, where she was like, it doesn't make any sense why they were hitting Qatar. Qatar has no involvement in this war. And I'm like, you literally host U.S. military bases. Like, how is that difficult to understand? You hosted how Iran got attacked. But all that, you know, I raise that because I'm wondering how you see Iran's relationship with the Gulf states shifting. And also we do, and this is more just kind of I just want your opinion on this. I know, you know, we don't really know how this is going to play out, but it's interesting to also see how different Gulf states have reacted, because you've had a much different reaction from, let's say, the Saudis than from the Emiratis. The Emiratis are just getting closer to the Israelis. They are becoming maximalist and like ridiculous, and getting closer to the Americans, even after the Americans totally use them as cannon fodder throughout this war and have demonstrated they don't care about them or protecting them at all. And actually, it's a liability to have an American military base in your country in this situation, not an asset. You just end up acting as like human shields for the Americans. Whereas what we see from the Saudis is something that is much more logical, I think, in terms of their reaction, where they're actually trying to still speak and maintain a diplomatic relationship with the Iranians, recognizing that Iran is part of this region. They're not going to go away. We don't like them, but we have to like deal with the reality we're in. And also the Americans totally screwed us with this war. Didn't like care what our opinion was, like didn't listen to any of our calls to tell them to stop, and recognize also that Israel really is a threat to everybody, including them at the end of the day. So I'm just kind of curious how you see that playing out moving forward with regard to the relationship between the Iranians and the Gulf states, and also like just what is this revealed about the Gulf states after all of this? Because I think it kind of shows them to be a lot weaker than we all thought they were, or maybe, you know, than I thought they were, and actually quite fragile. When you see that, like a couple months before, like Kuwait, for example, they exported zero oil in the month of April, which has been devastating for them.
No, it's a very good question. And when it comes to Iran's relationship with the Persian Gulf states, I mean, I would say it's an ambiguous relationship depending on which country. So with Saudi, I would say it's more ambiguous. With UAE right now, I would say it's pretty hostile, even though the UAE has hosted Iranian business interests for a long time, and a lot of the sanctions are in a way. So when Iranians try to get through the sanctions and avoid the sanctions, they use the UAE as a hub. So there's that kind of ambiguous relationship at some level. But then when a country like Oman, I would say Iran has very good relations with Oman. And even when it comes to the the future control of the Strait of Hormuz, they have said that we want to do it jointly with the Omanis. So I would say it depends on which Persian Gulf states or Gulf state that we're talking about. But yes, so I would say what really actually gets me regarding the Gulf states is that I remember a few years ago, I think this was back in 2024, the Gulf states said that we will not allow the US to launch an attack on Iran from our soil, but they did it anyway. So I don't know whether, as you were hinting at, whether it's just because of their weakness or that they just wanted to allow it because of other reasons. So there's also that. There's also exactly what you said, that their soil, their land is being used for attacks on Iran. So it makes sense for Iran to respond against US assets that are being hosted in those countries. Because if you're using, Kuwait's land to launch attacks on Iran, so many of the attacks came from Kuwait, what do you expect the Iranians to do? They cannot, launch an attack on an unrelated base, say in Missouri. They have to actually attack the base or the land that the U.S. is using in Kuwait. They have to attack that. So there's that, but in one of the latest proposals that I saw Al Jazeera publish, I don't know if it's true, but it was a multi-phase proposal that Iran had proposed, I think yesterday or today. And the last phase of it was that there would be kind of a security pact or a security approach between the Persian Gulf states and Iran, and that would, in a way, avoid future hostilities, and that would prevent the U.S. from using Gulf soil to attack Iran. So I think Iran is looking in the long term that they have to live and compromise with their neighbors who are living in the same region. And there's a long history, between the Persian Gulf Arabs and the Iranians of the Iranian plateau. They've been fighting, they've been compromising, they've been living together, they've been sharing a similar culture, same religion for centuries. So, and this applies to the 21st century. So they have to live together. And I think if finally the Arab monarchs and the Arab leaders should, because the Arab people, I would say, are more closer to the Iranian position and the anti-Zionist position. But when it comes to the leaders and the monarchs, I think eventually they have to realize that in order to have security, they cannot give this kind of free reign to the Americans in the region.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's pretty logical and seems pretty reasonable. I also want to ask you, I think it's super interesting, Navid, the way that bigger countries like Pakistan, China, and Russia have benefited Iran, like their relationship with Iran has benefited Iran in dealing with like the worst impacts of some of these things that the U.S. is imposing on them. So I'm curious if you could talk a bit of that. How much help is Iran getting from, for example, you mentioned earlier, like some of its relationship with Pakistan and the way trade with Pakistan is helping Iran get around the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that the U.S. has imposed, the piracy of the U.S. And then there's China. I'm not sure how true the reports were, but I saw that China was helping Iran with military technology in terms of like restoring some of its damaged air defense infrastructure after, during this pause. I don't know how true that is. And then obviously there's a relationship of military trade with Russia and also other diplomatic ties with Russia that's beneficial to the Iranians. So I'm curious how diplomatically, economically, and militarily relationships with those kinds of countries is playing out to Iran's benefit during this war.
Yeah, so you're correct that based on the reports that I've been reading too, Russia and China have been helping Iran in this war. And I think in the future, they will have a closer alliance, and Russia and China will come to see Iran as a more reliable partner. Because I think the worry before the war and before Iran was tested was that if we give all this technology and weapons to Iran, then say, the U.S. comes, does, a 3-day war, and the Iranian political system collapses, and there's a failed state, and then everything, will become chaos, or the Americans would control things, and we don't want that advanced technology to be in the hands of the Americans, or whoever comes that might be hostile to Russia and China. But now that Iran has been tested and Iran stood its ground and was able to drive back a superpower and its vassal state, Israel, I think Russia and China will come to help and aid Iran more, and they will collaborate more in terms of trade, technology, intelligence. And there are reports, I don't know how true they are, that China gave a very advanced satellite to Iran that was giving much clearer images than the satellites that the Iranians have. And with that help, they were able to do precision strikes on U.S. assets in the region. Also, Russia was providing intelligence to Iran to target strategic points in Israel. So there's all that, but I think what needs to be done in the future, if you want to actually move towards multipolarity, is that to de-dollarize the economy. And Iran has been trying to do this by charging the vessels that pass through the Strait of Hormuz in yuan as opposed to dollars. And even in the parliament, people propose that they should be charged in the Iranian rial, even though I don't know how realistic that is. But so Iran is also making these moves. So it's this kind of mutual friendship and alliance between the countries. But in the future, to move towards multipolarity, I think they need to materially de-dollarize in a serious way so that our economies are not dependent on the US dollar. And also there needs to be a human capital that's built between the countries, because so many of us in Lebanon is similar. There's the AUB people want to go to London or Paris or the US to study, but nobody goes to Russia and China. But we need to change that. We need to have human flow between our countries. And I see more people now going to Chinese universities. I think we have mutual friends who are studying in China now and getting their PhDs there. And I think that also needs to be built. And that way you actually have a more meaningful moves towards multipolarity, where Iran, Russia, and China have a bigger say in the political and economic fate of the world.
Absolutely. And Navid, one of the last things I want to ask you about here, and we've talked about this before, but I want to ask you now that because I think we talked about this before the war started, perhaps. I want to ask you about, you're a leftist, Iranian and American. You understand both of these worlds, and you've spent time inside the American left as well. And you consume American left media, so you know what the different sort of segments of the left what their conversations sound like. And no one's saying that you're not allowed to criticize the Iranian government or any government. It's just, I think right now there's like this war on aggression, a horrific war of aggression, one of the worst crimes you can commit against another country by the Americans and their Israeli partners against Iran. And so I do find it interesting that people try to kind of like prove their bona fides by like starting with, well, Iran is just a horrible system of government and it's basically evil, by basically saying every State Department talking point they use to justify aggression against Iran, but then say war is wrong. And so, and not everyone's doing that, but those people still exist. I think you like to call them rad libs. That's your term for these kinds of people. But I'm bringing this up to ask you, because I think you're very well positioned to give an opinion on this. And I agree. I know I'll agree with your opinion, so I also want to hear it, and I want to air it. What in this moment should the position of a leftist inside of U.S. empire, be, especially when Western media tries to sort of collapse criticism of the Iranian government into support for U.S. aggression? Because like that's the link people seem not to understand. So please go ahead.
Yes. So to clarify, some of my haters have accused me of being a liberal. You call me a leftist. I like that. Wow. So I mean, it depends, I guess. Yeah.
What is he? You're a chameleon. You're a chameleon.
And just to clarify who the rad libs are, the rad libs are basically people who profess to take radical positions, and they profess to be well-versed in Marxism and decolonial thought. But then when it comes to actual, taking positions on the issues of the day, then they usually take the positions that align with imperialist objectives. Whether they're doing it knowingly or not, it's not always clear. Sometimes they do it because of career reason or funding reasons, because they're worried that they lose their funding if they defend China or Iran or Yemen. But sometimes I think it's just, sincere confusion that, or just sincerely bad positions that they take. And my hope is to be able to convince them to actually take positions that defend a value like sovereignty. And to your question about what should a leftist in a place like New York or London or Paris do right now, is that they should defend Iranian sovereignty. So they should leave the internal issues to Iranians, because I see sovereignty as a necessary condition for freedom. So you cannot have freedom and a good country if you don't have sovereignty. And then once the sovereignty issue is resolved and the superpower and Israel get off Iran back and let Iran develop its own country based on its own decisions, then, we could move towards better things. We could crack down on rentier corruption. We could bring more economic equality. We could bring more liberal freedoms in the area of, say, speech and personal choice. And that should be left to the Iranians. But I think the main responsibility of a leftist in the US right now is not to just defend the Iranian people, because this is where the rad libs go wrong, because they say that I defend the Iranian people, but not the Iranian regime. And for some reason, they can't say regime. They have to say regime. And so when they say that, it's meaningless, because right now it's only the Iranian regime that's defending the Iranians. It's the IRGC with the weapons and with the missiles. It's not, some grassroots activist sitting, in a village, or some vegan activist sitting in Tehran defending Iran. It's, the people with the guns and the arms that's able to defend Iran. So not only should they defend the Iranian people, but they should also defend the Iranian state, because it's the Iranian state that has been aggressed upon. And if they care about values like sovereignty and decoloniality, then they should defend the Iranian people and the Iranian states. But if they care about things like, say, imperialism, they want, a big, glorious American empire that controls the resources and the flow of the supply and all that, then sure, don't defend Iran. But if your values are sovereignty, and decoloniality, then you should defend the Iranian people and the Iranian states. Sorry, that got a little bit too preachy, but I think you got the point.
No, I think it's a totally relevant point to make. And I mean, so when you say like defend the Iranian state, what does that mean? Like Iran's right to defend itself, Iran's right to have sovereignty, Iran's right to like retaliate against aggression, which is actually enshrined in international law. Like, what does it mean? Because I think some people hear that and they think that means that you have to like put up a photo with a heart around Mujtaba Khamenei's face, like Khamenei's face. Like, it's like, no one's saying you have to do that. No one's saying you have to write him in as a presidential candidate for America. But I think there's like something specific it means when we talk about what does it mean that, the idea of defending the Iranian state in this moment.
Yeah. No, you're very right. So it's not to, in a way, idolize the Iranian leader. So you don't have to be someone like the street here who brings the picture of the Iranian leader. You don't have to put that on your profile, especially because you might get banned by the major social media platforms. So that's not the point. But the point is that not to demonize the Iranian state and not to represent it as this exceptionally, repressive, oppressive, tyrannical, totalitarian state. Because when you do that, you delegitimize it, and then it kind of loses that public sympathy when it comes to defending itself against imperialism and Zionism. So the idea is that to treat the Iranian state as a normal state and also to recognize its right to defend itself and defend the country when it is aggressed upon.
No, and I think that's a really good point, because there's so many throwaway lines that people will say. And I really think it's performative to gain like a kind of liberal mainstream acceptance. Is like, of course, the Iranian regime or the regime is evil. It's one of the most evil, horrible countries in the entire world. It's terrible, but we shouldn't bomb it. It's like, well, actually, if you're saying it's so evil, then like you're justifying bombing it. Like, it's just, it's these throwaway lines. Like, I really wish people would take into consideration what they're saying. And it's also so offensive. Like, this country is like really multi-layered. And it's not just like one cartoonish villain in charge of everything. It's like a whole system of governments that has a lot of nuance to it. And when you collapse it into something that makes it sound more like the Israelis than what it is, because that's the one place I will say, like, the way that people talk about Iran is actually how a country like Israel is. Like, it is our cartoonishly evil and horrific and Nazi-like, but it's like, why are you gonna talk like that about Iran? And I really do think, it's like a mix of a part of what you said. There's like a confusion. I don't think all of these people are just like raging imperialists. I think there's a level of confusion, and then I think there's a level of opportunism, because as long as you as long as you say the words of Iran is evil, of course, and the Iranian government is like beyond the pale and exceptionally like Hitler, then you're basically like, CNN maybe will invite you on still, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what opportunity you feel like you're getting then. But anyway.
Yeah, no, you get the funds. You get, you're able to maintain a career in the West that puts you up the ladder. And so it's, I think partly it's opportunistic, but it's also, I think at some point you just start to believe in kind of the orthodox position. And the orthodox position is to kind of, hate on the Iranian state and treat it as some exceptionally evil force in the world. And some people, I think, just become convinced by that propaganda at some point.
Yeah, and I do think it's interesting too, because like the hypocrisy of it all is like, you're sitting in one of the most evil countries in the world that Iran can't even compare to. Like, there's nothing Iran has done that compares to the evil that's coming out of Washington and its allies.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's crazy to me too is that, say, we have a food voucher program here that the government gives some money to everyone. It's universal to buy some food, even though it's not much. But if I was talking about that program, and if I was a rad lib, I would have to qualify it by saying that the Iranian state is evil, but they're giving some vouchers to people to not go hungry or to have a less costly life. But say I'm talking about food stamps in America, I don't have to condemn the Epstein class and talk about the food stamps. They're kind of two unrelated issues in some sense. Or if they're related, you don't condemn the Epstein class. You just talk about food stamps. And similarly, you should be able to talk about Iran and the Iranian state without having to make these kind of ridiculous qualifications that the regime is evil. It's just at this point, it's just embarrassing. And honestly, especially what we've seen in the past few months, the realities we're confronting, I think it's just embarrassing. And at this point, if anyone uses the word Iranian regime, I just don't take him seriously. I say, I'm going to talk to someone else.
Well, Navid, on that note, I really appreciate you breaking all of this down. I appreciate your analysis so much. Can you please tell our audience where they can follow your work?
Yeah, so right now I'm updating you about the war mostly from my Instagram, and my Instagram is at Navid Zarrinnal. It's just one word, so NavidWahraman, and you can follow my war updates on my Instagram for now.
Fantastic. Navid, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.